authorities. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the day when hope unborn had died, yet with the steady beat have I not weary feet come to a place for which our Father sighed. We have come over away with the tears that's been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet from the place they serve our God will remit thee, lest our hearts drop with the wine of the world we forget thee. Shadowed beneath the hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
Good evening and welcome to Lift Every Voice, a celebration of African American poetry and song. My name is Sadie Zabawa. I'm the Youth Services Librarian at the Weaver Bolden branch of the Tuscaloosa Public Library, and I'm so glad to be joining you here tonight. This program is presented in conjunction with the Library of America and Schomburg Center's year-long nationwide celebration of the 250-year tradition of African American poetry, Lift Every Voice. We have two amazing performers here tonight. Ms. B.J. Reed of the Alabama Blues Project, who is recognized as one of the best female vocalists in Alabama, opened our event and will close it as well. We are also joined by poet Ashley M. Jones. Ashley is an award-winning poet based in Birmingham, where she is a member of the creative writing faculty at the Alabama School of Fine Arts, the founding director of the Magic City Poetry Festival, and her third collection of poetry, Reparations Now, will be published this September. Please join me in welcoming Ashley M. Jones.
Thank you, Sadie. Thank you so much. And what a beautiful musical opening. I was singing along in the little backstage area because I really do love that song, Lift Every Voice and Sing. We used to sing it in school all the time. And it was really great to hear it sung tonight. So as Sadie said, I'm going to be sharing some poetry with you all tonight. The way that I've set it up is that I'm going to read three pieces that are from the Lift Every Voice book that you can get from your local library or you can purchase it. And there's three of those, and in between each one, I'm going to read pieces of my own that relate to the poem or the theme that the poem introduces. So to begin, I'd like to read a poem that I think I encountered this poem first in high school, actually. And it's a sonnet by Claude McKay called If We Must Die. And this poem, to me, is very special because he's trying to, in my eyes, he tries to empower Black people who at the time that he wrote this were suffering untold horrors. Lynchings and other domestic terrorism was at a high in 1919 and the 1920s as well when this was written. And this piece gives us power to fight against that force. So I'll read If We Must Die by Claude McKay. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our cursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave. And for their 1,000 blows, men will face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. So when I thought about this poem, a few pieces of my own came to mind, and I'll start with one that's in my first book, which is called Magic City Gospel. And this is my road copy, so it's a little beat up. But this poem actually talks about an instance that I didn't experience myself. A friend of mine lives in Blount County, Alabama, and she and her husband have been building a glass cabin. It's a really beautiful cabin. And when they first moved, they noticed that they had, some interesting neighbors. And one of these neighbors hung a noose in his own front yard in order to commemorate Martin Luther King Day. And that spirit of really evil, we can call it that, is what McKay was talking about. And when I heard that story, I felt just really discouraged, honestly. And one way that I sort of work through those feelings is through writing poetry. So I wrote a poem in which I confront this noose, and this is that poem. It's called On Martin Luther King Day, a noose is hung on a tree in Blount County. Tonight, a noose drips from a branch like corn syrup. If you listen, you can hear it plunk and pool at the roots. You wonder if this is Blount County, if this is 2014, if this city is civilized, if you are a time machine of a woman, traveled back to this dim geography when Alabama is pulpy, ready to pluck its own stale fruit. You are thirsty, so you listen for the sound of water. Your tongue is a map of desert, and suddenly there's just the noose and you, darkness rolling out in all directions, the stinging of so much quiet, a dust storm of silence. You think, maybe it's a joke, nothing to fear. Fear is what happens when you listen to too much CNN. The noose is still. It says, you are a woman. You are black. You are in the middle of no place, Alabama. And if I catch you, I will ring you till you're anonymous, till you're not even a black girl. You're just some damn body. And I should have mentioned before I read this piece, it's actually a golden shovel, which is a particular form of poem. And it's written after a piece by Lucille Clifton, who we'll hear from a little bit later in the evening. But as I said, this poem is one, like If We Must Die, that just kind of always gives me pause and makes me think about all that Black people have been through and all that we are going through and all that we will go through in the future in this country. So speaking of the past and the present, I want to finish this section of the reading with two linked sonnets that, in the spirit of If We Must Die, which is also a sonnet, talk about just this wrongful terrorism, really is the only word I can use, that has been inflicted on Black people throughout time. And these two sonnets talk about events that happened almost 100 years apart to the day, which is really incredible to think about. But the first piece talks about someone named Mary Turner, and I'll give some information on her when I read the piece. And the second piece talks about Stephon Clark. The titles of these pieces are based on my favorite hymn, Mary Don't You Weep. So this first piece is Mary Don't You Weep, or Mary Turner Resurrected. And here's the epigraph. When Mary Turner threatened to press charges for the wrongful lynching of her husband in Brooks County, Georgia, on May 19, 1918, she was strung upside down, her clothes were burned off, and her unborn baby was cut from her womb and stomped to death. Turner was shot repeatedly, and she and her baby were buried close by their murder site. Like all resurrections, it began with blood, dirt, unending light. The Georgia moss punctuated by camellias, their white hurt stretching across Brooks County. No blight to stain their leaves, just the ash falling, bloody, from Mary's emblazoned womb. Her baby, a fire, its single soft cry still igniting the air. Even this baby, even this one-breathed angel was crucified to save us all. Maybe. Maybe Mary and her baby flew up from death in sweaty Georgia, her shallow grave shaken loose, finally free, resurrected. It turns out, all along, hell was earth. What else could she name that rock covered in leaf and loam? Not loving, not hopeful, and most certainly not home. Stephon, Don't You Moan, or To Serve and Protect. 22-year-old father of two, Stephon Clark, was shot 20 times on March 19, 2018, by Sacramento police in his grandmother's backyard. The gun police claimed to have seen him carrying was his iPhone. Is there a police protocol for grace, for the moment between show us your hands and shoot? That night, policeman, servant of the gun, did you give space for a man's innocence to bloom? Despite the loaded weight of your finger on the trigger, despite how the night painted that man bigger, made him a giant with a fireball in his hands, despite the loud explosion of your fright. Innocence is for softer things, an open, empty palm, a blooming flower, a spread of rocks becoming sand. Silly civilization, you thought we'd evolved beyond abuse of power, but again, a pruning. What a flower you were, Stefan, and what holiness in your body opening, petaled in the white helicopter light. This, an Armageddon of bullets, flowers, stars, stripes. So some of you may say, well, that was very dark. And yes, it was. But the thing about those things that I read is that they are all true. They all happened. And as a Black person, growing up, we learned these things at an early age. And we have to contend with that history, as children. And so whenever people say to me, oh, my goodness, kids can't hear about this, or whoever can't hear about this, I say, well, how do you think the Black children feel? Not only do we hear, but we know that it's our ancestors, that it's our contemporaries even now in some of these cases that we've seen. So I want to round out this section with another piece, a newer piece from the new book. And sort of like If We Must Die, which is, undercutting or revealing rather the dark sort of underside of what was going on in America. This poem that I'm going to read now is also a sonnet. We're sonnet heavy in this section. And it talks about the idea that things like this, like what we've seen in McKay's poem and in the two poems that I read, only happen, in the South. And that's just not true. They happen, like we saw with Stephon Clark in California. All over the country, these things occur. And the idea of racism isn't something that only exists here in the South at all. In fact, if you go all the way back to the founding of the country, you can see where some of the oppressive language does exist. So I wanted to write this poem to sort of talk about that. And it begins with a quote from Dr. King. And it's called, "All Y'all Really from Alabama." And the quote goes like this. "The straitjackets of race prejudice and discrimination do not wear only Southern labels. The subtle psychological technique of the North has approached in its ugliness and victimization of the Negro the outright terror and open brutality of the South." Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Why We Can't Wait. This here, the cradle of this here nation. Everywhere you look, roots run right back south. Every vein filled with red dirt, blood, cotton. We the dirty word you spit out your mouth. Mason-Dixon is an imagined line. You can theorize it or wish it real, but it's the same old ghost, see-through, benign. All y'all from Alabama. We the wheel turning cotton to make the nation move. We the scapegoat in a land built from death. No longitude or latitude disproves the truth of Founding Fathers' sacred oath. We hold these truths like dark snuff in our jaw. Black oppression's not happenstance, it's law. So I want to move back into the reader, the book, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And I want to read a poem by my favorite poet, Lucille Clifton. She was brilliant and wrote about so many different topics. She wrote about womanhood, Blackness, America, motherhood, everything, anything you can think of, she wrote about it. And she had this particular way of saying things seemingly very plainly, but if you look again, there's all these different layers in it. So this poem by her is called Won't You Celebrate With Me, which is just a really great affirming poem and celebratory poem that we can all, listen to and read and feel empowered in our own, existences. So this is Won't You Celebrate With Me. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. It's that "and has failed" part that so many of us find so empowering, because all of us face, challenges every single day. They may be different challenges. Myself as a Black woman, I face very specific challenges, and others of you face different challenges. But that we survive each day is really a celebration. So I want to read a few pieces of my own, which sort of talk about this same theme of self-celebration or self-empowerment. And the first one is actually a poem that I wrote. Let's see, what do I want to tell? This is a long story, but I wrote this poem as I was trying to get over a particular relationship, which was not a good one. And I was looking for ways to celebrate myself and to just empower myself. And so I happened to hear about a writing exercise that my friend Monica Sook, who is a great poet, she shared with me. And she had learned this exercise from the poet Carl Phillips, who is fantastic also and who you should read. And the exercise was to write a poem using the subjunctive tense. And so I thought, that might be fun. And while I'm doing this subjunctive tense poem, I can maybe give myself some power back in this relationship that I mentioned by sort of writing this man out of my past using the subjunctive tense. So that's what this poem is sort of about. And it's called Summer Vacation in the Subjunctive. If I were a woman, if I were a wanted woman, if I were a woman with soft fingers, if I were on a beach with a man, if he was a man, if a man can be a man before he acts like a man, if I were on a beach with a man and he held my hand, if I liked my hand being held, even if it was held at the wrong angle, if my wrist was ringing in pain but I kept it there, if my heart were held wrong, like my hand, if I kept it there, if I was kept in pain, if I were pain, if I were a woman, if I were a woman before I was a woman, if I were a woman who knew her body like a woman knows her body, if a woman knew, if I knew, if I were on a beach with that man, if this time that man dissolved into sand, if the sand became hot under my feet, but my feet were gold, if a woman were made of sun, if I were made of sun, if I burned the world around me until it shone beautiful and brown, if this burning was called healing, if the healing made light. I love reading that poem because it just makes me feel powerful, honestly, like I'm in charge of my destiny and also in charge of what I choose to remember about my past. So I'm going to go back to the first book. And let me see. So this poem is also about being a woman and women who I love. In this piece, Virgin Mary Reimagined, I imagined these women who are in my family as the Virgin Mary. The reason that I did that is because I've always loved seeing, deities, gods and goddesses portrayed as people of color, specifically as Black people. And in my household, we were taught, to see ourselves in everything, including in God. So this is a natural, thing for me to just imagine these gods or goddesses or, holy figures as Black people. So I decided I would do this with some grandmothers and aunts of mine. And so this is Virgin Mary reimagined. As my paternal grandmother, head adorned in blue-gray curls, nestled in the gold wool of her easy chair. She cannot walk without help, ankles swollen with our pain, square heavy glasses to magnify her God-stained eyes. As my cancer-stricken aunt. The light of her sick room, a silvery blue, her row of concave teeth shining in the shadow of the IV pole, full cheeks prevailing despite the tender sickness in her ovaries. Her string of breathy jokes defy the finite sound of her golden voice. As my maternal grandmother. Her hands, stained and cracking from the wash water, her shoulders sturdy, yoked for rearing. She is a powerful shield for all her daughters, one's birthed and one's found. A psalm edges out of her small brown mouth, grace, whole and white in her overflowing smile, dotted with gold, precious teeth. As my blind aunt. The loud television in her blue-black bedroom, the sweets tucked like children in her cheeks, a cross of light gleams in her searching eyes. She answers our prayers in playing cards, Savior Spade, King, Queen, Jack of our Jesus. As a mirror, our wombs, clean and soft and blue, our eyes the color of holy magic. We dream of the taste of our own merciful milk. It flows, whisper white, into God's open mouth. All right. It's pretty lonely doing these StreamYard readings because you can't see anyone or hear anyone. So I'm just imagining that whoever's out there is reacting and is happy because we're reading poetry. So I want to now read a piece that's also about a woman who, survived, much like Clifton's poem talks about that idea of something trying to kill you and failing. And so I thought about this piece that I wrote about an aunt of Frederick Douglass. If you read his autobiography, you'll learn about his Aunt Hester, who faced some abuse from her master because he, wanted to have her and she refused. So this piece is about her, and I wanted with this poem to sort of give what could be seen as her weakness or her scream, as she's being, hit by this master. I wanted to give that power, to give that spirit of "and has failed" that we saw in the Clifton poem. I wanted to put that in her voice, even as it's crying out, perhaps in pain. So this poem is called "What Flew Out of Aunt Hester's Scream," and it begins with a quote from Douglass's book. I have often been awakened at the dawn of day by the most heart-rending shrieks of an own aunt of mine, whom the master used to tie up to a joist and whip upon her naked back till she was literally covered with blood. And that's from Frederick Douglass, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. What flew out of Aunt Hester's scream? Her pretty face, the dawn, the men who ate it whole, summer, the plantation grass, fear, a golden scythe, the cotton bleeding pink, the way a dress unfolds to a whip, to a man's hands, which are whips. Blood, 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 Jesus, Mary, Joseph. Her body, desire. Her body, a slave. Light. So I want to close out this section of the reading with yet another powerful woman who I think we all know very well, Harriet Tubman, who is someone who I admire very, very greatly, and I'm very grateful to her for what she did for our people. Who knows where we would be if she didn't exist and if she didn't do the incredible work of freeing people from slavery. So this poem sort of tells the story of how Harriet, or Miss Tubman, I don't know her personally, so let me use her name, Miss Tubman. This tells the story of how she got visions and how she decided to start the Underground Railroad. And all you have to know going into it is that her birth name was Araminta Ross, and she changed her name to Harriet, which was her mother's name after she escaped for the first time. She wanted to make it harder for the slave catchers to find her. And then Tubman was just her married name. And she was also called the Black Moses because, excuse me, I'm sorry, I keep having some issues. I tried to eat some dinner before this, so that's what happens when you eat before you do a performance. But anyway, she was called the Black Moses because she took so many people out of, a bad situation into the promised land, so to speak. So this is called the Book of Tubman. And God said, let her head be split, a black melon leaking. And God let iron sprout from the master's hand. And God breathed blood in the master's eyes and said, strike. And that's the story of the great crack in Harriet's skull that was an eye. That's the way God poured her, full of visions, thick as sap, unmoving, slowed as a scab over the gash. And God said, let there be Harriet. And Araminta went on to glory. Araminta could smile in heaven, hoist her skirts above her ankles and dance. Harriet, on earth, kept that sweet eye fixed on the North Star, kept her pistol cocked, each bullet an unsaid prayer. And God made a railroad out of dirt and sweat, made a train out of a woman. And God made her hair a burning bush, her body so holy, even he called her Moses. All right, so let's make our way back into the Lift Every Voice book for our final section of the reading. And I saw somebody had commented that they are having fun listening, so thank you, person who commented, for commenting that. So this poem is by Gwendolyn Brooks, who was an amazing poet. And if you have not read any of her books, please hasten to your local library and check out some of her books because she really was incredible. She had this really unique way of using language, and even the way that she spoke. If you look up any of her videos of her speaking, she had a really distinctive voice, and that voice comes through on the page as well. It's hard to describe, really. So I would encourage you to either read or listen to Gwendolyn Brooks. And this poem is about Malcolm X, who perhaps needs no introduction. But of course, we know that he was a leader in the Black community who was assassinated before he could continue his work. So this is called Malcolm X, as I said, by Gwendolyn Brooks. Original, ragged round, rich robust. He had the hawkman's eyes. We gasped. We saw the maleness raking out and making guttural the air and pushing us to walls. And in a soft and fundamental hour, a sorcery devout and vertical beguiled the world. He opened us, who was a key, who was a man. Love that poem. It's just the syntax is really maybe what I mean when I say Gwendolyn Brooks has a specific way of using language. Her sentences are often arranged in an unusual way, which makes for me a very pleasurable reading experience. So when I think about this poem, I think about Malcolm X and what he stood for, the empowerment that he tried to instill in Black people. I think about his friend Muhammad Ali. And maybe some of you have seen the new film One Night in Miami. I highly recommend that movie. It's really great. But now that I've seen it, I can never not think about, Malcolm X without thinking about Muhammad Ali. And so I wanted to read a piece that I wrote for Muhammad Ali, not for him personally. I didn't know him, sadly, but I wrote it after he passed away. And it just so happened that around the time that he passed, somebody had asked me to write a piece which included parts of Walt Whitman's work. And so I was thinking about the poem Song of Myself, and I thought, wait a minute, this, sort of bravado kind of tone sounds a lot like Muhammad Ali, who himself was a poet. Maybe he wouldn't have called himself that, but if you listen to some of his interviews, he does these little like rhymes that to me are just little poems. So this poem is about Muhammad Ali, and it uses lines from Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, and it also uses some of Muhammad Ali's own words. So it's called Song of My Muhammad. I know I have the best of time and space in my two black fists, in my black brain, the way I can never, will never be measured. This, my immeasurable greatness, this, my beauty and my speed, I do not need your white Jesus or even your feeble praise. I know I'm the prettiest thing that ever lived. No friend of mine tells me who I can worship. No friend of mine stops my dance around the ring. No friend of mine labels my chair anything but throne. I have no chair, no church, no philosophy that does not salute me as a king. No man can stop my left hand hooking. No man can stop the poetry I keep under my Louisville lip. I'm so mean, I make medicine sick. Today, I shoulder my way into a crowded heaven, where my hands are steady and my mind is strong. And I say to my spirit, you are golden, even here, golden. And my spirit says, I am satisfied. All right, well, we have made it, friends, to the last poem of the evening. And this poem, as I was thinking about the Malcolm X piece and even about Muhammad Ali, I tried to think, do I have a piece that is all encompassing in a way that these two figures were? And so I ended up on a piece that I wrote about God, which is not to say that either of these men are God, but maybe y'all see where I'm going. People with just a bigger than life sort of presence just reminds you of the bigger than life, presence of God. And so this is a poem called God Made My Whole Body. And I want to thank everybody for listening, because like I said, this is my last piece. So I appreciate y'all hanging with me for the last few minutes. God made my whole body, and the way it moves, and the way it shakes and jiggles and plops. And God made my smile, and the 1,000 tears that fall from my eyes. God made the sun and the moon and the leaf held loosely in my godson's perfect little hand. And God made the summer breeze and the guitar Ron Isley crooned over. And God made the grass and the bugs and the dogs and the trees. And God made all of our bodies to make waste. And God made even the waste that lives in us. And God made the way the world spins and the way it will shake us right off if we don't act right. And God made the rivers which make it possible for us to drink. And God made the clouds which hold the rain. And God made the birds which fly and the wolves that howl. God made the folds of my brain and the thoughts that burrow there. God made my belly, my uterus, and all the little eggs which might become children. God made the doubt that rests there, like bubbling gas. God made the silence I wrap around myself some nights, alone. God made the music we sing and the music we hate. God made the ears which help us stay balanced, help us to hear what people say behind our backs and in front of them. God made sweet potato pie and aunties and mamas who know how to add just enough nutmeg. God made my whole body. And God made my grandma and her gold tooth. And God made my grandma and her curly wig. And God made my grandma I didn't know. And God made my grandpa who was a ghost. And my grandpa who was a terror. God made fear and the way it slices us up thin and flimsy. God made the way a hand quivers before it strikes. God made pain. God made the blood which runs and keeps us running. God made an everlasting red. Thank y'all so much again for listening, and thank you to Sadie and the library for having me tonight.
And as our finale, I'd like to do a short medley of two songs by Dinah Washington, who was actually born and raised here in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and moved away to the city, changed her name and recreated herself and became an evil gal. Then I would like to do What a Difference a Day Makes, which was recorded by her, and she received her first Grammy. In fact, this was her only Grammy. She was nominated for another Grammy, but What a Difference a Day Makes was she actually received a Grammy for. And I would like to think that our forefathers made a big difference. In fact, I know they did. And I challenge us today to make a big difference in the world by everything we do, everything we say, the people we touch. Let's just make a difference in the world today. What a difference a day makes. What a difference a day makes. 24 little hours brought the sun and the flowers where there used to be rain. dear. Today I'm a part of you, dear. My lonely nights are through, dear. Since you said you were mine, Lord, what a difference a day makes. There's a rainbow before me, clouds above can't be stormy. Since that moment of bliss, that thrilling kiss, is heaven with you. Find romance on your menu. What a difference a day makes. Let the difference be you.
And that concludes our program. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. If you're interested in reading the Library of America companion anthology to the Lift Every Voice events that Ashley read from, we have 2 copies of African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle and Song available to check out from the library. Thank you to my 2 co-grant writers, Ron Harris and Nabila Lovelace, without whom this evening would not be possible. And one more huge thank you to BJ Reed and Ashley M. Jones. Have a great night.